Saltwood Brownings. Browning adopted salt-impregnated walnut stalks in the mid-1960s, borrowing a furniture industry technique from Morton salt to accelerate drying. The process scaled across high-grade California walnut blanks around 1965, with the bulk of affected guns emerging from roughly 1967 to 1969. The intent was straightforward: speed production to meet demand on models such as the superposed over-under, Auto 5 long recoil shotgun, and later Citori lines. Browning abandoned salt curing by 1972 and destroyed remaining salted blanks. These were conventional Browning firearms mechanically, long recoil Auto 5s, break-action superposed, and later OUs, with the issue confined to the stock-to-metal interface rather than the actions themselves. The functional problem lived in the wood. The salt method stacked walnut blanks in large salt beds. Brine runoff soaked lower layers, embedding hygroscopic salt deeper into some blanks. Once fitted, salt within the wood drew atmospheric moisture to the steel tangs, butt plates, trigger guards, and fore-end irons, promoting rust where wood met metal. Owners reported pitting and rust staining at concealed interfaces. Safe queens parked in arid conditions might remain clean until humidity activated the embedded salt. Others showed immediate corrosion under plates and tangs. Browning offered stock replacements to original buyers and, in ending the curing process by 1972, cut off the production source. Many affected guns were restocked and remain in service. Original saltwood pieces carry a stigma that doubles as a niche collecting story. Intratec KG9. The KG9 traces to George Kellgren's Swedish interdynamic MP9 concept, an open-bolt 9x19mm submachine gun that never secured military buyers. In 1982, Interdynamic USA, soon Intratec, introduced a civilian semi-auto version as the KG9, later modified as the closed-bolt KG99 under ATF pressure, followed by TEC9 variants and the AB10 after the 1994 federal ban. The role targeted the U.S. civilian market with a simple, inexpensive, high-capacity pistol derived from an SMG lineage. It used straight blowback with a fixed barrel in a tubular upper. The original civilian KG9 fired from an open bolt, which the ATF deemed readily convertible, prompting a move to closed-bolt operation. The family used a molded polymer lower mated to stamped and milled steel components with rudimentary iron sights and minimal traditional safety features. Dimensions across the family ranged widely, with short barrels and relatively heavy mass for a pistol. The open-end upper tube and the way the bolt and buffer were retained by the polymer lower represented a cost-saving layout that proved marginal under heavier grain or hot 9mm loads. Reports describe polymer lower cracking or failure if the upper separated from the lower during recoil with such ammunition. Reputation settled around structural fragility and a culture of tinkering. Later factory revisions threaded the upper tube's rear and contained the recoil assembly with an end cap independent of the polymer lower, an explicit fix for lower failures. The move from open bolt to closed bolt addressed convertibility concerns but did not rehabilitate the platform's durability image. The public safety profile is shaped less by mechanical malfunctions than by criminal notoriety in the 1990s, where TEC9 derivatives appeared in several high-profile crimes.
Regulatory consequences followed: model-by-name state bans, feature-based restrictions, and the 1994 federal ban that Intratec attempted to dodge with naming and feature changes. The brand dissolved by 2001. Surviving examples inhabit an uneasy space, collectible to some, avoided by others, and remembered as a regulatory catalyst as much as a firearm. Hotchkiss Universal SMG. Hotchkiss at Sea developed the Universal in 1949 as a compact folding 9mm submachine gun for police and mechanized troops. In French post-war trials, it competed against other compact designs, but ultimately lost to the MAT-49 for military adoption. Production remained limited, on the order of a few thousand, and sales went to French police elements, small exports such as Venezuela and Morocco, and limited Foreign Legion use in Indochina trials. The action is closed bolt blowback with an internal hammer and out-of-battery safety logic. The 30-32 round box magazine feeds a standard 9mm cartridge. The headline feature is the folding architecture. The magazine well hinges forward to stow, the barrel telescopes and locks via a button, the stock folds under to latch against the mag well, and even the pistol grip folds over the trigger guard. Sights are simple twin apertures for 50 and 150 meters. Folded length is notably compact for its barrel length. Build quality shows post-war machining with many small interdependent pieces in the Bolden barrel modules. Later CMH2 production simplified details to cut cost and complexity. The weapon functions reliably when deployed, but proves awkward to open, close, and manipulate under stress. The selector's detent is easy to overshoot. Sight height is very low relative to the tube stock, the barrel shroud doubles as the only forward hold and heats rapidly, and left-handed users foul the sling peg. Legionnaires reportedly kept it deployed in the field rather than rely on rapid folding. With limited contracts and trial service, the Universal's legacy is that of an ingenious but over-engineered folder. Scarce today, valued by collectors for novelty rather than for service pedigree. Remington CTI 105. Introduced in 2006, the Remington 105 CTI was a 12-gauge gas-operated semi-automatic with bottom ejection and a single underside loading and ejection port. Remington pitched it as an ambiguous, soft recoiling field gun and later revised it as the CTI-2. Production ceased in 2009 after persistent reliability problems. The system adapted elements from Remington's 1100 lineage, but rerouted the action return spring above the magazine tube for maintenance access and used a carrier or yoke that flips reliably only if timing is correct. Barrels were 26 or 28 inches with an overboard .735-inch pro-bore profile and overall length in the 48-inch class with the 28-inch tube, around 7 pounds. The receiver was described as investment cast with a modern coating. Testing pinpointed a core failure. During ejection and loading, the carrier could bounce up instead of staying down to catch the next shell. When that happened, the magazine released a round that fell out of the bottom port and the gun cycled as a single shot. Review teams reproduced intermittent single-shot behavior across both CTI and CTI-2. An engineer on site allegedly contacted the factory to halt production after discovering the malfunction with non-Remington ammunition, emphasizing the model's sensitivity to shell brand and hull construction. Patterning results were respectable, but the reliability deficiencies overshadowed ballistic virtues. Remington attempted iterative fixes in the CTI-2 without curing the carrier timing problem. The design never saw broad adoption, and after discontinuation, no other major maker brought a similar single-port bottom-eject semi-auto to market. Boito Double Barrel. E.R. Ementino of Brazil, often marketed as Boito and at times crossing into U.S. channels under other labels, exported budget double-barrel shotguns in the late 20th century, including the early 1980s via mass retailers. The intended role was a low-cost over-under or side-by-side for casual hunting and utility, not a competition or heavy-duty field arm. Construction reflects aggressive cost control, soft steels, minimal finishing, loose wood-to-metal fit, and simple extractor systems. Gunsmith reports and owner accounts describe deformed or soft push rods in the firing mechanism, poorly fitted components, and a tendency to treat multiple guns as a parts pool. Conventional break-action operation with 2 firing pins is straightforward in principle, but execution matters for retracting pins, timing, and consistent primer strikes. Common complaints include misfires with off-center or light firing pin strikes, firing pins sticking in the forward position, play in the forearm posts and linkage, stiff opening after firing, extractor hangups, and even cracked receivers or barrel solder failures. Range anecdotes include long strings where one barrel failed on the first trigger pull more often than not until the gun was cleaned and deburred. Parts availability through surplus channels keep some examples running, but frequent repair needs remain a theme. Safety hazards emerge when receivers crack or actions pop open at firing. The pattern of repair, cannibalization, and gunsmith caveats shaped reputation. As a result, the Boito sits in collector discourse as an example of the trade-off between price and durability, serviceable for occasional use when bedded, and generally discouraged for sustained or hard use. Fusil Mitrailleur 1915 CSRG Chauchat. France built the Chauchat in 1915 as a portable, automatic rifle, light machine gun for walking fire, mass-producing it rapidly through civilian factories repurposed for wartime demand. The weapon allowed an advancing infantryman to carry suppressive firepower without a heavy tripod, an important doctrinal goal in trench warfare. While it saw widespread issue to French units and later to American forces, it never escaped controversy. The action is a long-stroke automatic with selectable fire and a detachable, curved 20-round magazine. The magazine has large cutout windows on the right side, meant to aid visual round counting. In trench reality, those windows admitted mud and grit directly to feed lips and cartridges. Thin metal magazines deformed easily, and inconsistent manufacturing tolerances across subcontractors compounded the problem. The original chambering was 8x50R Lebel. U.S. conversions to 30-06 are specifically cited as the worst performers due to chamber geometry and finish issues. Mechanically, the concept could function. Some French 8mm examples with proper maintenance were serviceable,
But field testimony is dominated by jam reports, overheating stoppages, receiver screws that demanded frequent attention, and a level of parts interchangeability that failed to support frontline repair. American troops expressed particular frustration with 30-06 conversions, and armorers resorted to reaming and polishing chambers and adjusting fasteners to coax reliability. The weapon's legacy informs later LMG design: sealed magazines, stronger feed components, and tighter, purpose-built manufacturing rather than improvised industrial conversions. In collecting, the show shot endures as an infamous artifact, important to the story of portable automatic fire, yet remembered for the limits of crash program armament. WAMO Powermaster. WEMO's non-toy WAMO division produced the Powermaster in the 1950s, a single-shot 22 long rifle pistol marketed at extremely low cost through mail-order channels. It targeted casual plinking and youth training, but did so with an approach closer to airgun construction than to conventional firearms engineering. Production was brief and the line was discontinued. The pistol has no magazine. The user retracts a floating bolt with a charging handle, hand loads a round into the chamber, and lets the bolt go forward. After firing, the system automatically ejects the spent case. The striker is exposed and there is no manual safety or decocker. Materials and layout emphasize casting and cost control. Pot metal components, minimal lock work, and reliance on a flat spring to keep the bolt in place rather than a positive locked condition. The result is a gun that can be accurate when it fires on command, but that also exhibits dangerous behaviors. The striker may release if the pistol is jostled or even gripped firmly, and the bolt can drive the firing pin into the rim as it springs forward. Live-fire testing described a discharge before the trigger was touched, followed by repeated striker releases during empty chamber manipulation simply by shaking or squeezing the frame. Remington Model 700. Remington introduced the Model 700 in 1962 as a mass-market, affordable bolt-action hunting rifle family in short and long actions and in a broad array of calibers. Over decades, it became the canonical American bolt-action. The intent was general sporting use, and the platform's aftermarket ecosystem grew to match. The action is a traditional turn bolt with a fixed internal magazine. When built correctly, the 700 has considerable accuracy potential. Bench tests in the supplied material mention groups in the 1.25 to 1.5 inch range at 100 yards with factory ammunition. Over time, owner reports and litigation focused on alleged uncommanded discharges linked to factory triggers, as well as feed and chambering glitches attributable to bolt face geometry and extractor spring interference on some rifles. One test example required a hard close to chamber. The manufacturer promptly shipped a replacement bolt. Manufacturing quality is described as variable across eras, with claims of decline tied to management changes and workforce turnover. Extractor springs protruding just enough to catch the rim during chambering, malformed bolt faces, and the folk remedy of "slam the bolt home" appear in user narratives. Beyond the shop floor, Remington faced extensive litigation and bankruptcy proceedings that split ammunition and firearm divisions. Replacement triggers and aftermarket solutions became common responses. Operationally, the 700's record in hunting and in law enforcement and military marksman roles is extensive, even as modern buyers question quality consistency in later production. Sig Sauer P320.
Sig Sauer's launched the P320 in 2014 as a modular, striker-fired system derived from the P250's removable fire control chassis. Designers Sean Toner and Michael W. Meyerler created a platform that could change grip frames, slides, and calibers around a serialized fire control unit. Military adoption followed in 2017 with the XM17 modular handgun system, fielded as the M17 and M18. Mechanically, it is a short-recoil, locked-breech design with a striker system kept under relatively high spring tension to deliver a roughly 6.5-pound trigger pull. Field stripping does not require depressing the trigger. Caliber support spans common service rounds. Forensic inspections described in the source material found gouges on sear ramps, a striker hook protrusion, and a striker safety spring not properly seated, lower leg dangling, suggesting supplier or finishing variants. The FBI BRF is cited as having used X-ray, slow-motion rigs, and manipulation protocols that produced ignition without a trigger press in some trials. In one series, 9 of 50 manipulations reportedly produced a discharge. Another new M18 sample fired on the second manipulation. The proposed mechanism involves minute slide/frame movement, reducing sear engagement, while the striker is near full tension, potentially compounded by wear on shallow sear surfaces. SIG implemented a voluntary upgrade with revised fire control parts and a lighter trigger shoe to reduce inertial effects. Bench tests described a secondary sear notch catching in sterile conditions, though the BRF cautioned that duty mode timing remained uncertain. Litigation and agency pauses followed, including a 2025 ICE memo barring P320 variants for duty use. Many owners continue to report conventional range reliability and sound ergonomics, which coexists in the record with duty mode concerns about tolerance stacking and part quality variation.
Winchester Model 1911 SL Widowmaker. Thomas Crossley Johnson designed the Winchester 1911 self-loading shotgun after Winchester and John Browning failed to agree on royalties for Browning's own autoloader. Introduced in 1911 and produced through 1925, the 1911 SL entered a market already defined by Browning's Auto 5 and Remington's Model 11, but sought to avoid Browning's patents with distinct mechanics. It is a long recoil autoloader with a 5-round tubular magazine produced in multiple gauges. To chamber the first shell, users were expected to cycle the barrel by hand because no bolt handle protruded to rack the action. Stocks were laminated from 3 lengthwise wood pieces, and the recoil buffer used fiber washers that degraded rapidly. As the washers failed, recoil impulse rose and mechanical stress increased, leading to stock cracking. The most notorious hazard arises from the barrel cocking method. Owners often rested the butt on the ground and pushed down on the muzzle to compress the action when swollen paper shells were reluctant to feed. If the sear or firing pin engaged out of sequence, or if the muzzle was inadvertently pointed at the user, an accidental discharge could occur at face or chest height. Later accounts note injuries and fatalities associated with the loading technique. Winchester made minor changes to buffers over the production run, but never addressed the fundamental hazard of barrel cocking. Some gunsmiths retrofitted bolt handles or improved buffers, but there was no factory recall. Sales remained modest, and the model ended in 1925. If you enjoyed this video, a quick like and share with fellow enthusiasts goes a long way, and feel free to drop ideas for future topics in the comments. Thanks for watching.